This is the
Five Stars
Podcast.
Let me talk to you. This is such good shit.
If you like good old-fashioned rants, then you've tuned into the right show. I've gone off on AEW before, but I don't know. This one might take the cake. For any of you that didn't watch Dynamite this week, first of all, don't. And second of all, if you saw that main event, you're probably thinking the same thing I'm thinking right now. And no, the thoughts aren't good. But before we get into the swearing and seething bit of rage, I do want to promptly welcome everyone to the Five Starr Wrestling Report, where we try to have fun and talk about professional wrestling. That is, whenever it decides to actually be wrestling and not whatever on God's green earth Tony Khan is letting happening on that stupid television program of his. Of course, subscriptions are always great to have, so I'd appreciate the support from everyone if you'd hit that sub button, like the show, and stick around, because if you're down to hear some unpopular opinions, this is the wrestling podcast for you. As of this moment, I am still reading the goofballs comments about that Dynamite main event and the people that are still defending it. Whatever parents dropped those dopes on their heads as a kid, I feel sorry for the parents. Should have dropped them on their head harder. Should have given them a spike pile driver just to put them out of their goddamn misery. Because in no logical realm of the universe can I think of one good reason to defend anything about that main event. But, son of a gun, there are actually real human beings out there right now in the world that are saying that they enjoyed it and they thought it was great. I don't think I will ever understand the full cognitive functioning of the human brain to where seeing people actively try to kill themselves on television can be seen as enjoyable, but yeah, maybe that's just me. Perhaps I'm a rare oddity in the world where I actually like to see people live their lives and be fruitful and multiply. Can't really do that when you're buried 6 feet under a grave, but, what do I know? Anyway, let's get into this thing now since I'm already kind of on a roll. Oh boy, Dynamite. Let me tell you all about AEW Dynamite, ladies and gentlemen. It's funny too, because after last week's total debacle, I sat down on Thursday morning, and sometimes I'm able to watch the show live on Wednesday night, but more often than not, I end up waiting until the next day just because of the way my schedule works. But I sat down, obviously recorded the show on my DVR for replay, and it's like physically I was putting in the effort to hit the play function, but mentally I was like, do I really even want to watch this show right now? Well, the answer is no, I really don't. But I ended up trying to get myself somewhat in a mental state to just, get through this one with as little pain as humanly possible. A simple in and out procedure, as Joe Pesci once quoted in the greatest movie of all time. This was not a simple in and out procedure. I can tell you that for sure. It was actually kind of the standard episode of AEW Dynamite that I always talk about, where it starts off good, and after the opening segment, it is one steady downhill slope all the way to the finish line where everything just totally falls off a cliff. And boy, did this show fall off a massive cliff by the end there. It fell harder than Darby doing that stupid uncalled for senton onto the stacked up chairs off the ladder. Now, to be fair, I did think that the MJF Wardlow segment was better than the opening segment, so the model was not entirely consistent for this week. But I don't think there's much denying at this point that hour 2 of this show is usually the biggest chore to get through. It opened with Adam Cole and Dax Harwood in the Owen Hart Tournament quarterfinals. And with the role FTR's been on in the last couple months, I've almost kind of become a mark for seeing anything that Dax and Cash do on this show. Usually because it's a safe bet that anything they're involved with is going to be great, if not sometimes the best part of the entire show. This is not the best part of the show this week, but it was certainly a quality match. God damn, it's probably the best thing I've seen Adam Cole involved with on AEW after almost half a year. It's so hard to even describe Cole at this point in AEW. In a weird, almost bizarre way, he's almost kind of bulletproof when it comes to this AEW fan base. Like, they practically fed this guy to the wolves since he showed up in AEW. He's never won any marquee or high-profile matches, no championships, and the people still cheer for him. Now, granted, it's hard to tell sometimes whether or not Adam Cole, the guy, is over versus the Adam Cole chant. More often than not, I'm kind of leaning toward the latter half. But, you know, at least we've now established that you can book a guy like dog shit for as long as you want, and if you got the cult following, you can do whatever the fuck you want with the guy. The people still love him. Once upon a time, this would have been a total believable main event NXT level title match. You know, back when Cole actually felt like a big deal and wasn't booked like a complete dork. I really like this match, though. It took a while to get going, but by the end there, it ended up being a really well-worked professional wrestling match. You know, Dax had his ribs worked on for a good majority of it. Cole basically took about 80% of the match while Dax sold. And they ended up building to a nice little comeback sequence for Dax. He had a great-looking spike pile driver on Cole toward the end there. It looked like it killed him. And when Dax put Cole in that sharpshooter, man, did the people pop for it. You know, in a lot of ways, looking back in hindsight, I can make the argument that the wrong guy won. The people really wanted Dax to win this, and when Cole put him in the sharpshooter and Dax was selling the ribs, trying to fight through the pain, but he ends up tapping out at the end, you could tell that people were just totally bummed by it. I actually kind of think Martha Hart summed up the finish pretty well there after Cole won. They put the camera on her in the crowd, and she just kind of shrugs her shoulders like, yeah, sure, I guess. Of course, in her defense, she probably has no clue who either of the guys were in this match. And the people were cheering Cole enough to the point where she probably thought he was the babyface. That's how fucked up this business is in 2022. So I probably would have just left the camera off her entirely, but it is what it is. Cole advances. FTR continued to be the MVPs of 2022, and now we just wait to see how Tony fucks him up again. It's either a third match with the Beta Bucks where FTR do the clean job, or they get pulled from TV and we don't see them for 6 months. Either is possible, but one is inevitable. And that took us to Hangman Page coming out for commentary for this CM Punk John Silver match. And I'll be the first to admit, I don't know a damn thing about sports, particularly nothing about hockey. Can someone explain to me what the fuck was going on with Punk in this segment? Okay, they're in Long Island. So he comes out with a jersey for one of their hockey teams in New York. I think their team is called the Islanders, if my brief research is accurate. And the fans immediately boo Punk from the gate. He tells him to cut the music as he's posing on the stage. And he walks down to the ring in complete silence while he's just soaking in the wave of boos from the crowd. And then John Silver comes out with his Outlaw Squad. And now he's the most over babyface in the segment. He got a bigger reaction than Hangman Page did coming out. He sure got a bigger reaction than Punk after the people saw him in that hockey jersey. And Like, the only thing I thought during the entire segment is, who the fuck are we trying to get over here? It also didn't help that the match went way too 50-50, with Silver getting in a whole bunch of unneeded offense. I mean, I really don't have a whole lot to say about the actual match. The Dark Order are just terrible, and they all need to go away entirely. But whatever they were trying to accomplish in the opening portion of this segment, it went completely over my head entirely. And again, part of that's probably my fault for not being attuned to what's going on in the sports world, but I don't know, it was just really distracting to me. I didn't like it at all. And seriously, if you're telling me that this was solely designed to turn CM Punk heel from out of absolutely nowhere on free TV with no build-up or anticipation, well, this whole thing is even stupider than I'm giving it credit for. I mean, I was willing to let the Bryan Danielson heel swerve go because the people were already kind of craving something different with him anyway at that point. And I like Punk's promo afterwards on the Hangman, but I don't know, to me, the whole thing kind of came across like they're trying to force a personal issue between these two with extremely little backstory. Like, I can get behind the idea that neither guy likes each other and their only goal is to be the champion, which, I mean, Punk basically said in his promo, but I don't know, dude, like, doing the whole blood feud thing with these two feels really fast-tracked right now. The other thing that made no sense to me was that after Hangman's promo last week, which again I thought was easily the best promo he's ever done in AEW, there were a lot of people that were convinced that he was the one turning heel, which, I mean, even if I didn't see it that way, it may have been the better move to go with since Page has lacked pretty much any momentum since he won the belt to begin with. Punk as a heel is something I'd like to see at some point. In fact, this would have probably been the feud to do it with. But not blown off on television with no build-up. Yeah, do it at the pay-per-view to create a big moment. Make the people pay to see it happen. You know, tease it on television with some small jabs here and there so that when you get the actual payoff, like there's an added suspense there. You know, then people can say, oh, okay, well that makes sense because X, Y, and Z happened on television that led to this point. Yeah, but with all the way this came off, it was like, oh, okay, Punk's just a heel all of a sudden because fuck it, why not? Again, I'm probably not seeing something that other people are, but in my lizard brain of watching this business for over 20 years, I like when my face and heel turns in wrestling have build-up and logic put into it. Which is why every turn in WWE in the last 20 years hasn't been jack shit, because they turn people on a whim depending on what side of the bed Vince wakes up. So then we had this Hook, Tony Nese, Danhausen bullshit, which I'm not even going to bother discussing. It sucked. It was stupid. Nese beat Hook in like 10 seconds, and that was probably the only redeeming factor about the whole segment. But let's get into the MJF Wardlow contract signing, because this was something. Well, they begin the segment with, obviously Wardlow coming down to the ring, which is to be expected. And now he's in handcuffs again. You know, as if we didn't just see him pummel 50 security geeks last week. But I'll look past that little booking quirk because the little dark side of the ring satire teaser was fucking awesome. It did kind of raise an eyebrow a time or two for me because, like, in kayfabe, I'm supposed to be buying the idea that these two hate each other and have a personal grudge. It's like the comedy element of it kind of felt on the nose at first. You know, but then I thought about it and I'm like, well, I can at least buy the idea that MJF is such a prick that he'd piece something together like this to try and get under Wardlow's skin. And like I said, this is fantastic. Yeah, they got Jericho narrating at the beginning here where he's being prompted to highlight the MJF and PG Punk feud. But of course, he doesn't want to say PG Punk because the script is biased toward MJF. Then he goes, wait, how much are they paying? He had Taz in there doing the fake crying at one point over MJF losing the dog collar match. They had Jake Roberts in here, and under the name on the graphic, it read, The Snake Guy. They even had a cameo appearance from Barry Horowitz, where he's recognized as legendary Jewish wrestler He's ranting about MJF losing to Shawn Dean in the TV match because of Wardlow's interference, and he goes, "Take it from a top guy like me. Shawn Dean is a jobber." Fucking dead. So that whole thing could have been the entire show, and I would have loved the episode hands down. But, God, MJF was in full fire mode for this segment. He's coming out sporting the Islanders jersey. Like, he's not even trying to be a heel at this point because they're in Long Island, so he knows the fans are going to be solely behind him. I did appreciate the line in here where he's taking shots at the people in the cheap seats saying they're poor, but they're still beautiful. I mean, God, I could talk about this segment for hours if I wanted to. But, let's kind of keep things chugging along here because I don't want to dwell on how MJF is awesome. We all know that by now. So he lays out the gauntlet for Wardlow. Out of the page of the Cody Rhodes playbook, yes, he in fact dropped the name Cody Rhodes, he's going to put Wardlow through the same ringer that he put Cody through in order to get the match with him. First, he has to take 10 lashes from MJF on TV, and if he survives, he has to face Shawn Spears in a steel cage, which, albeit I kind of rolled my eyes at that one. Not because it didn't make sense in the context of the story, but because we literally just saw a cage match on the show less than a month ago. And he tells Wardlow that if he manages to get past those two obstacles, he gets the match with him at the pay-per-view, where I can't remember if he outright said this or not, but I believe if Wardlow were to win that match, then MJF would release him from his contract so that Wardlow could sign an AEW contract. Kayfabe, obviously. But MJF does say that if Wardlow loses at the pay-per-view, that he's never allowed to sign an AEW contract, which I guess would de facto mean that Wardlow works for MJF for the rest of his career. Yeah, there were a couple little details that were left unchecked, but I'll look past that momentarily. And of course, they get to signing the contracts, but Wardlow's obviously handcuffed, so he can't maneuver the pen around. So, like a dipshit, MJF tells the security to uncuff him. And Wardlow was great here, where after they undo his cuffs, he fakes him out like he's going to attack them, but then he laughs it off. And he signs the deal. They go to handcuff him again. But this time, Wardlow means business. And he starts laying waste to the security again, which was still equally as hilarious as last week when they did it. Made even better by MJF being such a moron with having ample time to run out of the ring and up the ramp. Could have been in fucking Venezuela by the time Wardlow would have gotten his hands on him. No, instead he just cowers behind Shawn Spears in the corner so that after the security are all laid out, Spears gets taken out, leaving MJF and Wardlow in the ring together. And of course, smart Mark Sterling comes in, jumps on Wardlow's back, the heels all escape, and Sterling is left to take the powerbomb bump through the table. By the way, for the record, I still don't really know how Sterling fits into the whole equation of representing MJF as his legal attorney, unless he was the one that put the contract together, which they never really explained that, but I don't know. Sterling always just kind of randomly pops up in MJF segments from time to time, and I'm never really sure why. But yeah, this whole segment was great. Best part of the show, and this feud has turned around very drastically from the last few weeks where they were just, having Wardlow go out there and do big guy squash matches. Because the booking of those segments were not really ideal to get Wardlow over, and now that he's actually attacking security and he's beating up people like a wild man, it fits more into that Goldberg-like machine playbook that they've been trying to go for. Instead of him selling in TV matches for 5 minutes straight. So I like this stuff that they're doing a lot better. And if this was the main event of the show, it would have probably been the best main event segment in Dynamite history. Unfortunately, the reality soon set in that I had another hour to sit through, and well, this was about the point where that show headed off the proverbial cliff that I mentioned earlier. We had Jungle Boy versus Ricky Starch for the fake belt. And I think the best way I can put this is, maybe it would have been a better idea to put the MJF Wardlow contract signing on last, because by the time we got here, it was clear as day that nothing else was going to follow it. Yeah, that sucks, because there was a lot of good wrestling in this match. Crowd didn't give a fuck about it. You could hear a pin drop, it was so quiet. The other problem with it, too, is that the announcers are spending half the match talking about Danhausen and Hook and all that hot garbage, basically doing everything except paying attention and calling the match. Yeah, I don't know about this one. The finish was well done. If the goal was designed to make the babyfaces look like goddamn idiots. So Strickland ends up running down because Starks went to grab the FTW belt. And I guess Strickland had the power of foresight to see this coming because he was right there to make the intended save when Starks grabbed that title. And of course, it ends up backfiring because Jungle Boy gets the visual roll-up on Starks for the 10 count while Strickland and the ref are jaw-jacking on the outside. And then Starks ends up hitting Rochambeau on Jungle Boy and retaining the belt. So not only does it mean that the heels are guaranteed a title shot, but it also means that one of their World Tag Team Champions was pinned again. This time in a match for a fake unrecognized belt in the middle of the show. I also like the awkward three-way team stare down with Keith Lee and Strickland, Hobbs and Starks in the Jurassic Express, where everyone's just kind of standing around in complete silence looking stupid. Probably waiting for some kind of cue to hit the theme and move on to the next part of the show. So who's ready for some good old-fashioned WWE light skits? Well, let's be honest, 99% of this stuff is WWE light anyway. Only difference with the Jericho Appreciation Society is that they are actively trying to be awful. And they are succeeding tenfold. So they come out for a victory speech. A victory speech for what? I have no idea. Victory for missing a fireball shot on Eddie Kingston? Sure, we'll go with that. Anyway, they're all yapping about this, that, and the other thing. I'm not really paying attention. All of a sudden, out comes Jon Moxley, for Lord knows what reason, and he's walking through the crowd, swaying his head and bopping his shoulders and doing whatever the fuck Jon Moxley does. And eventually this leads to all members of the Blackpool Fight Club coming down to confront the JAS outside the ring. And that's also followed with Santana, Ortiz, and Kingston showing up on the other side of the ring so that the situation is some like 6 or 7 on 5 advantage babyfaces. And they all get into the windmill punch extraordinaire. And that's where I tapped out and just skipped ahead. Remember earlier when I was talking about how Bryan Danielson was great being a heel and having great singles matches and standing out on his own? Well, here he was a guy in a segment filled with guys doing stuff. And I have no idea what this build towards, nor do I really care. At this point, anything that involves Chris Jericho on the show, I'm almost guaranteed to be disengaged. And the sliding slope continues here. Jamie Hayter versus Tony Storm in an Owen Hart quarter and or semifinals round match. I have no idea which one. Nor did Excalibur when he was plugging the match earlier on. And remember when I said that the Jungle Boy Ricky Starks match was so quiet you could hear a pin drop? Well, this one was so quiet you could hear the wind blowing in the arena. And it's not to say that the girls did anything wrong here, because they really didn't. I mean, Jamie's still very green, but she's not a bad worker. At least her shit looks moderately believable. I've said it before, Tony Storm is someone that I was never entirely sold on in WWE, but the other problem, too, is I never really got to see much of her. I think if she was used better outside NXT UK and I got a little more exposure to her on a big stage, I would have been able to form more of a cohesive opinion. Tony winning is the only thing I really wrote down about the match, and it's obviously the right call. If it's not Britt that ends up winning the tournament, the only other person I can see plausibly winning is Tony. But, again, sorry, I just don't really care about the women's tournament. I'm already apathetic about the men's tournament as it is, but, the women's version just feels blech. It's not remotely compelling at all. And I can't be the only one thinking that either. By the way, there were a bunch of skits and backstage pre-tapes that I skipped over or just glossed past. Most of them I didn't have a whole lot to say about. I did appreciate the one where Kazarian flat out told Sammy Guevara and Ty Conti, "Your vlog sucks." And having never watched a single one of their vlogs, I'll take Frankie's word for it. And we've arrived. We arrived. God, this main event. You know, looking back, this is probably why I was in such a foul mood after the show, and kind of what led me to give that opening monologue I did about not even wanting to bother with AEW this week. Last week, it was the Varsity Blondes House of Black segment that reeked of asshole. And this week, we found our candidate. It's Darby Allin and Jeff Hardy in the Owen Hart tournament. And, shocker, it's anything goes. No DQ. Falls count anywhere. I'll let Corny fill you in with the rest of the catchphrase when he recaps it. Oh, and of course, it's a dream match. Because every match in AEW is a dream match. So I don't mean a goddamn thing. Anyone that saw Jeff's match last week probably went into this one with their head on a swivel, because if anything was clearly established after last week, I think it was the fact that Jeff is not in the best physical state in 2022. So, of course, we're going to put him in there with Darby so they can do an ECW fuck-off match. Signed off on from Tony Khan, by the way. And that's not a rib. They legitimately established in the video pre-tape earlier in the night that Darby went to Tony and said, "Please let us go out there and intentionally try to kill each other." And Tony, like the unprofessional dipshit that he is, said, "Oh yes, Darby, absolutely, have fun. What could possibly go wrong?" Fucking moron. I am not kidding when I say this. Within the first 2 minutes of this match, not only had they already stacked up chairs on the outside for an upcoming stunt, but they also had broken out a ladder and had done multiple spots using the ringside steps. And of course, the big spot of the match that everyone's going to be talking about is the incredibly dangerous and stupid stunt off of the giant ladder where Darby proceeded to do a senton and basically landed spine first on all the chairs on the outside. And we can talk about the stupidity of him actually doing the spot to begin with, but I'm more so hung up on the fact that they actually went through with the stupid spot and it wasn't the fucking finish. You know, because it's got to get your shit in wrestling, so obviously they were going to do more stuff, each of which would lessen in impact as compared to the giant ladder spot. It's the most notable thing they did. It's what people are going to remember the most, discount the finish. So, of course, it's just a random spot in the match that leads to them doing more bullshit. But at the end of the day, I guess I shouldn't be too angry about it. I mean, who gives a fuck about Darby Allin? If he's not retired in the next 5 years, he'll be dead. And quite frankly, the business will probably be better off for it. It's probably why Sting doesn't say or do much at ringside when he comes down with Darby. He's probably thinking to himself, you know, I remember a time when we actually drew money in the business, and you know, we could do that by not purposefully hurting each other or ourselves in the process. Either that or he's like, what am I doing here? Both would be acceptable. And I think Tony Schiavone perfectly summarized the absolute fucking idiocy of the whole match when he accurately pointed out that after seeing these guys act like stunt show clowns and fall 20 feet through the air with dives onto gimmicks and putting their bodies in all these incredibly high-risk situations for no reason at all, the finish to the match is Jeff Hardy winning with a wrestling move. A cradle roll-up. Moronic. Oh, yes. Forgot to mention this. This was a quarterfinal round match. Jeff Hardy still has to wrestle another round after this match against Adam Cole after having basically killed himself in the opening round match for no reason at all. Yeah, Cole's probably thinking to himself, what a goddamn idiot this Jeff Hardy is. It's going to be a walk in the park for me next week. So yeah, this whole segment can suck my hairy ass. Fuck you, Tony Khan, for allowing your employees to do this dangerous, unprofessional-looking stunt show garbage on your television program. Fuck you, Darby Allin and Jeff Hardy, for going through with it. And especially, if you're one of those AEW numbnuts out there that actually gets off on this kind of BS in the business, most of all, fuck you too. You're the worst offenders of this whole charade to begin with. Because you cheering this garbage just gives AEW the leverage to keep spewing this kind of crap out more often than not. And mark my words, the day's going to come where they're going to do another one of these stunt show routines, and I'm not even bothering to call it a wrestling match at this point because it doesn't even deserve to be recognized in the same stratosphere as such. But the day's going to come where someone dies doing this stuff. If it's not going to be here, it's not out of the realm of possibilities it'll happen someday. For fuck's sake, these people are so tone deaf, it's ridiculous. Do these people not understand who this tournament is designed to tribute? Owen Hart? You know, the guy that fell 80-something feet in the air and essentially died on a live pay-per-view? Are we just going to pretend that Darby putting himself in a similar situation on live television is non-comparable? I want to know how something like this even got signed off to begin with. God, I'd love to have been a fan in the crowd watching Martha react to this horse shit live. It's probably why they kept the cameras off of her, because if she didn't outright leave the fucking building at that point, she was probably disgusted with the whole thing. Seriously, fuck these people. Just fuck them all. So I'm done with this show. Possibly forever, but certainly for this particular show. I don't ever want to see or talk about that match ever again, and quite frankly, I really don't ever want to see or talk about Darby Allin and or Jeff Hardy ever again. So as we move along to NWA World Championship Wrestling from May 10th, 1986, our program begins this week with teaser footage of Jim Cornette and the Midnight Express being jumped by two cowboy hoodlums under masks. This taking place amidst the fallout to a Midnight versus Sam Houston Nelson Royal tag match. And David Crockett, with passion and vigor in his voice, informed us that these men were known as the James Boys. A likely story. And there was obviously more to come with this later on in the program, but before they cut to the booth, the tease they left us with was both individuals putting a giant bull rope noose around Corny's neck and proceeding to choke him, possibly even leading us to believe that they hanged him on the spot. Graphic, but not exactly how it went down in execution. And we cut back to the booth with Tony Schiavone doing the big Great American Bash tour hype for later on. He also ran down the card for the show and all the megastars we could expect to see. And that immediately led to our first interview. And God help us, it's a solo Robert Gibson promo. Hold on to your nutsack. This one could hurt. He informed us that Ricky Morton's basically gunning for Ric Flair in the NWA World's Heavyweight title. They're all out for revenge on the heels that have jumped them and tried to leave them for dead. And to say this was comatose in delivery would be understating it. I expected much worse. It was merely uninspiring. Probably still better than about 99% of the guys that cut promos in the business today, but all I can say is, beginning your television program with a Robert Gibson promo, probably not the best way to keep viewership up early on. But with that said, it took us to our first match, which was Ron Garvin versus Maurice Cooper. This is also probably not the most productive mechanism to keep viewership steady early on. Not that watching Garvin smash people isn't entertaining, but probably would be better if it did not take him 5 minutes to beat a dweeb like Maurice Cooper, who sucked mass cock in this match. Only thing I wrote down was the following. Wow, this is awful. Garvin does a Cesaro swing and hits an elbow drop for the 3. Bad. That was followed with a Ragin' Bull promo. And we've talked about this before with Manny Fernandez promos, where it always feels like he's building to a big cadence at the end of his thoughts, but then he'll just keep rambling on for like another 10 minutes. You know, sometimes he'll randomly fluctuate between speaking in English and Spanish. That was pretty much this promo. He briefly put over Ronnie Garvin's superiority in his match, as if we needed further validation that Ronnie Garvin is superior to Maurice Cooper. And then he delves into some talk about the Paul Jones Army and that Jimmy Valiant's going to shave them all to be bald-headed geeks. And then for absolutely no discernible reason I can think of, Bull randomly broke into a say no to drug speech. So we go from babyface promo on Ronnie to Valiant's going to shave a bunch of heels bald to now he's a Dare sponsor. All right, then. Then coming back from the break, we had a Wahoo McDaniel promo. The show wasn't too great, in case we haven't already established that by now. So he was talking about Jimmy Garvin for a bit, and then he basically throws his name into the hat for title contention against Arn Anderson in the TV title, since Arn decided to stick his nose in Wahoo's business recently. And of course, they provided some context there with Arn and Jimmy doing a 2-on-1 beatdown on Wahoo at a recent taping. Not exactly sure where the Arn involvement came into play with the Jimmy Garvin Wahoo story. You know, obviously they had some house show matches around this time, but as far as my knowledge goes, I don't think that was a long-standing program. Because I know for a fact that Wahoo and Garvin ended up having the Indian strap match during the Bash Tour. I can't remember off the top of my head what Arn was doing, but I don't ever recall this being a major feud for 86. So this might have been a placeholder thing to keep Arn busy for a while and, I don't know, maybe freshen up the go nowhere Jimmy Garvin Wahoo McDaniel feud that's been going on for eons and eons. Robert Gibson wrestled David Dellinger in singles competition. There was legitimately one thing I wrote down about this match, and it was the completely fucked up finish, wherein after Gibson had worked over Dellinger in a heel hook for about 30 seconds, he picked him back up to his feet, sends him off the ropes for a reversal, and as Gibson flips over for the sunset pin, he had to struggle to keep this guy pinned to the mat for the 3 count. They scrambled on the mat. Gibson spent about a minute trying to press Gibson's shoulders under his legs. Pee Wee Anderson took about an extra 2 minutes to actually get in position to count the pin, and Gibson won after having the guy down for almost an hour. This was also not very good. Then we had Dusty and Magnum TA out for a legendary promo. It's a very status quo Magnum promo early on. He's running down Nikita and the Russians and vowing revenge there. A very stern promo about the Baby Doll Midnight Express story where he's telling Corny that his day of reckoning is coming. And after Magnum essentially plots his case for homicidal redemption against all of the dastardly heels that have been fucking with them left and right, Tony turns to Dusty, and his first words, directed at Magnum, "He's so pretty." And while he's talking about all the lucky ladies in TV land that are going to get the chance to get a handful of Magnum someday, there's Magnum with his head down, trying desperately not to burst out laughing. And of course, Dusty's awesome for the remainder of the promo, basically breaking the fourth wall and accidentally dropping the bombshell about the real identity of the James boys. But it only took him 17 minutes into the show to finally get something good, and lo and behold, Dusty's there to save the day, where he's just being Dusty. Really no other way to put it. Nikita Koloff wrestled Tony Zane, or more accurately so, Nikita killed Tony Zane. Killed him deader than 3 o'clock. I also noted the large purple bruise right above Zane's right tit. And for the record, I'm not exaggerating when I refer to Zane having boobs, because he absolutely 100% had man titties. He at least took a nice flip bump for Nikita's Russian sickle at the end. I also believe this is Nikita's first actual singles match back on Studio Wrestling, after having protested that he was not going to be wrestling on the show until the NWA management agreed to his terms for a U.S. heavyweight title match. I can confidently say watching Nikita wrestle is a lot more interesting than watching Ivan wrestle. And we'll just leave it at that. So then we cut to a tape of Tony Schiavone interviewing both Jim Crockett Jr. and Sandy Scott to plug the upcoming Great American Bash Tour. By the way, Sandy Scott, for those of you that don't know, did indeed work as an executive for Jim Crockett Promotions around this point in '86. Also co-founder of Smoky Mountain Wrestling alongside Jim Cornette, obviously. And I did not get the full list of towns and venues that they were going to be visiting over the summer, but I did get a few of the locations here. He plugged Philadelphia, D.C., Memphis, Charlotte, Atlanta, Jacksonville, Richmond, obviously the Richmond Coliseum. I believe there were plugs for Freedom Hall in Johnson City. Yeah, basically most of the key venues of the territories where they were guaranteed high grossing ticket sales and audience attendance. And I'll tell you this, when they were plugging the idea for people not to make summer plans because of all the towns and locations that the Bash Tour was going to be hosting, they were hard selling it. They never plugged anything close to the Pittsburgh region in '86, so I can't say for sure that it would have been worth me holding off on vacation plans at the time, unless we were planning something close to the Richmond area of Virginia where we would travel every summer. And I'll tell you, dude, when you saw those video snippets and the huge crew of people in attendance for the '85 Bash Tour the previous year, goes to show how big the marketing campaign was for them at the time. Cutting back to the ring, we had Tully Blanchard and Rocky King. Kind of talked recently about the passing of Rocky King and how even though the guy wasn't a big star in the business, he always had a great look. He worked hard when he was sent out to do jobs on NWA studio shows. I mean, this is easily the best match of the show. Kind of makes me wish I really would have gotten to see more peak Tully in the ring as a kid, because goddamn, that guy was phenomenal. Still crazy to think that Tully was really only around with the Crockett Promotions for about another 2 years before all the fallout with management and Dusty over pay disputes. He's someone that you always look back in the scope of history as a guy who was always a great worker, but man, Tully was so much more than that. Yeah, he's a kind of professional veteran that I would have loved to have had the chance to work with around this time if I had gotten into the business. Like a super professional guy that made everyone he worked with look good by comparison. Even the dirt worst of the dirt worst jobbers around this time. And trust me, there were plenty of those, particularly on this show. Then we had Jim Cornette and the Midnight Express come out to admonish Baby Doll, Magnum, and Dusty for what they did to them at the recent house show. And this was the point where they had played the full context to the Midnight Express James Gang angle. The James Gang, a.k.a. totally not Magnum TA and Dusty Rhodes and Hoods. And as I noted, we actually got the full video here as to what happened after they had wrapped the bull rope around Jimmy's neck and started choking him in the ring. It then promptly led to them dragging Corny outside the ring to the floor, and with the rope still tied around his neck, I believe it was Dusty who picked Corny up over his shoulder and carried him all the way through the back to the outside lot, where they proceeded to place Cornette on the ground. The rope, I believe, was hitched around the back of the truck, which was obviously backed by the entryway. And as they tease the idea of vehicular homicide on live national television, this was the point where Bobby and Dennis came in to make the save for Corny. That escalated rather quickly. Now, of course, going back and watching this over the years, I obviously remember this pretty vividly. Doesn't mean that it's still not baffling television all these years later, but I guess it goes to show the length that the babyfaces were willing to go in order to avenge Baby Doll getting whacked in the stomach with a gimmick tennis racket. So then they cut back to the booth where Cornette was running down the faces, saying that this situation had Corny's mom worried sick, and that she spent several days attending to Corny's invisible rope burns around his neck. And then he referred to Baby Doll as a fat pig, and that he could whoop her ass any day of the week. Then we had the Midnights taking on Bill and Randy Mulkey, which I think might be the first time the Mulkey brothers have actually teamed up together on these TBS shows. The best part of the match was the spot like a minute in where one of the Mulkey brothers, the one in the purple tights, gets launched to the outside concrete. And when I say launched, I don't mean he was safely deposited onto the outside concrete. I mean, this man may as well have been shot through a cannon. He hit the concrete so hard. This then immediately led to Bobby Eaton giving him a delayed vertical suplex onto the concrete, which looked like it equally sucked. So, whichever Mulkey brother it was that was sporting the purple ring gear for this show, dude, who knows, maybe got a little bit of a pay raise for it. The other Mulkey in the orange also was hit with a backdrop off the top rope at one point, so they at least made sure that one of them didn't get off scot-free with taking the ass beating. And I may have actually lied. I think this might have been the best squash on the show. Tully and Rocky was good as far as pure wrestling goes. Bobby and Dennis versus the Mulkeys was entertaining death television. And then following that, we had Corny at the booth again to share some insider information about sending a personal letter to NWA management, Bob Geigel and Jim Crockett Jr. in particular, to have the recent match overturned that we saw on the videotape. Because the James gang interfered in the match, they ended up costing the Midnight Express the match via DQ. And because it's apparent that the James boys are Magnum and Dusty in disguise, the heels want the decision reversed. So out comes Jim Crockett to basically let them know that if they want the finish overturned, they have to prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that the boys under the hoods are actually Magnum and Dusty. But until then, no, TS basically. As of right now, the decision still stands and Nelson Royal and Sam Houston have a non-title victory over the Midnights. That one's got a sting. So they advertised for the show a Ric Flair-Arn Anderson tag match, which seemed pretty big on paper, possibly leading us to believe that they were going to be wrestling some real top-notch talent. They wrestled Bob Owens and Carl Styles. Not quite top-notch talent. I literally wrote nothing down about this, except probably a rare instance of me actually seeing Flair get a submission win with the figure four. It's funny, you think about all the people that have used the figure four in the business. It's kind of been treated as just another transitional move in a lot of cases, which is kind of a shame because I always liked the figure four hold. But, even when you look back through the history books, even Ric Flair didn't win with that hold on many occasions, but he did here. That was immediately followed with a Flair promo. Spends a minute or so putting over the importance of the $40,000 World Heavyweight Championship with gold, silver, rubies, and jewels. And a misspelled nameplate, but we won't talk about that. He also brought up Ricky Morton, which meant by default that the words teeny boppers and or training underwear was going to get dropped at one point. And after he's done running down all the top heels and champions in the NWA at the current moment, he vows that he's going to beat up one of the Road Warriors just to show how much of a man he is. Get the tombstone ready now. And then we had perhaps the greatest segment of all time. Jimmy Valiant and Manny Fernandez come out for a promo. And Valiant has a t-shirt on that reads, Pistol Pez Whatley on the front. And on the back it reads, will be a bald-headed geek. So in both kayfabe and as a shoot, the storyline actually is that Jimmy Valiant refuses to call him Shaska Pez Whatley. And I will be honest with you, Valiant made me absolutely immersed in all his gesticulating and bebopping around here. There's a point where Manny's trying to cut a promo, and I have no idea what he's saying because the only thing I'm watching is Jimmy Valiant standing there bouncing up and down like a wild man, while Tony is standing next to him trying not to laugh. Boogie Woogie Man's gonna boogie woogie. What can I say? And that led directly into Valiant and Bull taking on Larry Clark and Paul Garner. Again, all I wrote down, very simply, Jimmy Valiant does wacky stuff. The people chant bald-headed geek at Paul Jones and his crew. And then Manny hit a flying burrito for the 3. And then we cut to the booth where Magnum and Jim Crockett Jr. were laying out the gauntlet for the official contract conditions for Nikita and Magnum in the U.S. Heavyweight title. And they were going to announce the special terms next week. You know, because we already haven't dragged this saga out long enough. Why not? Let's just hold off another week. Of course, I remember what it all leads to, but for sake of spoilers, I'm not going to mention anything now because it's a pretty big deal in the context of the story. It just took 7 years to get there. We had the most ridiculous six-man in the history of mankind. Actually, before I get to that, we had a Paul Jones Army promo, which really wasn't all that noteworthy, which is kind of a shock when you consider the men in the group and all their wacky over-the-top personas. I did note Shaska Whatley calling Manny Fernandez an off-brand colored boy. 1980s, everyone. What a time. So the match is Baron Von Raschke, Barbarian, and Shaska Whatley against the team of Art Pritz, Kent Glover, and Butch Brannigan. Guess they ran out of steady jobbers for this week. At least Butch resembled something close to a wrestler's body, meaning he at least looked like he shaves his chest more than twice a year. I miss Tijo Khan. Where did he go? I want to see Tijo work another match on Studio Wrestling. So if you can picture in your head 6 bumbling goofballs doing stuff, it's pretty much what this match was in a nutshell. The job guys are collectively the worst set of job guys they have at their disposal. Baron for what little he did in the match to begin with. Watching him work in 86 is something to behold. Let's just put it that way. And Barbarian picking up guys and throwing them around and not giving a fuck where or how they land. It's amazing. The best part of the match is when Butch tags in for the first time at the very end, and Tony goes, "Here comes Butch Brannigan." And in the same breath, after Baron gives him an overhead backdrop, there goes Butch Brannigan. He was also pinned with the flying headbutt from the Barbarian, so the job guys made sure they hung the new guy out to dry. Can't blame them. Then we had a Koloff family promo that I didn't write anything down about. Something about the contract conditions that are going to be discussed next week. And then Nikita did his usual broken English deal where I understood nothing except for the words Magnum TA. And our main event was gorgeous Jimmy Garvin against Jim Dawson. And he killed the guy in such short order he didn't even need to take off the green entrance gear. But who cares about the match? Let's talk about this follow-up promo. There is a lot of suspect material that passed off on television during these days. I mean, on this very show, we heard a man refer to another man as an off-brand colored boy. When I look back at this Jimmy Garvin promo, I think this might have been more derogatory in delivery. He essentially lets everyone know that he watched Dusty put his arm around Magnum's shoulder earlier on after having called him pretty, and he physically had to hold himself back from coming out and slapping the two silly. He was so disgusted. The idea of a man being sexual with another man. What kind of sickening, twisted logic is that? And above all else, the idea that gorgeous Jimmy Garvin would be offended that another man was called pretty on live television. More comedy. And then he ran down the whole Wahoo story, saying that he's already turned his attention onto Arn because he's too afraid to confront Jimmy Garvin, much less fight him. I also laughed uproariously at the line here where Jimmy says that if anyone has something derogatory they want to say about his squeeze, Precious, then they have another thing coming. And then he turns and refers to him as Tony Schiavone. This is almost as perfect as Jericho calling him Schiavone. And this alone would have been a perfect promo, but just to add a little bit of frosting on the top of the cake at the end here, he took one more pot shot at Dusty following Magnum into the bathroom because they can never leave each other's side, and he promised that there would be no more men hugging on the Superstation. Because that's just weird. No more male on male affection. And then he kissed Precious just to make sure that we all got the picture. So yeah, that was a pretty goddamn great ending to the show. When I look back at things, there wasn't a whole lot to be enticed about with this program, but I had a good hearty laugh at some of the skits we got this week, and between seeing the Mulkey brothers get mutilated and the Paul Jones army continuing to be wacky, I don't know, I found some entertainment value on this one. Oh yeah, and apparently they've outlawed men hugging on TBS going forward. So for all the homophobes out there, you won't have to worry about that. God, the 80s. What can you say? Fun times. And I guess we can move right along here to World Class Championship Wrestling from May 14th, 1983. And of course, we begin, as always, with the rundown of the card. And this week, it's a double main event featuring Buddy Roberts and King Parsons, as well as Jose Lothario versus Kamala. And we were also going to get a little more in-depth insight on Chris Adams later on in the show. I also enjoyed Bill Mercer dropping the line on the Iceman being in action with his unorthodox style, to which they immediately show a still image of him hitting the butt bump on a mass job guy. And speaking of the man, myth, and legend, you're just talking about him in the closing moments of the studio show review. Our first match was gorgeous Jim Garvin versus Mike Bond. And, of course, I don't need to spend another 10 minutes putting over how great Garvin was. I don't know, he's one of those guys where, like, when he walks in a room, he just oozes charisma. It's like one of those bar scenes in the old films where, like, some macho guy walks through the front door and everyone just turns their head. Garvin's totally one of those characters. I did not enjoy this as much as the Chavo Guerrero Jimmy Garvin match from a couple weeks back, but this is still good. Story-wise, they're still building up the rematch with him and David Von Erich over the Texas Heavyweight title, which Jimmy had recently dropped back to David. Of course, if you remember, a couple weeks back, they shot the angle where Garvin had knocked out David with the camera on the outside and cut him open. It did hit me during this match. Mercer started plugging the Star Wars event at the Reunion Arena for the summer. I believe this is the event that took place in June. So that is going to be another event that we recap here on the FSWR podcast as we get closer to the event. And then we had Tea Time with Chris Adams. And no, I'm not making that gimmick up. They shot a pre-tape with Mercer and Adams sitting down at a patio where they were legitimately having tea and crumpets. Amazing. And this was exactly what professional wrestling should be when you're trying to introduce and establish a relatively new character on the scene. Adams talks about his background in wrestling over in England, says that he gained enough recognition and traction through his ability to travel to places like Mexico and Germany and Japan, working with a great set of talent from all over the world. Talks about his ring style and what separates the American style from basically the rest of the world. In this case, he referred to the American form of wrestling as rougher. I almost burst out laughing. Chris Adams would be ashamed to see what the American style has become in 2022 if he were still alive. Just show him 10 seconds of a Beta Bucks match. He'll retract that statement. He talked about some other things here, meeting the Guerrero family and having the pleasure to work with them. Says he has never had much background with the Von Erichs, but he's looking to get closer with them in the Dallas region. And then he mentions the Mongol. Says he has some unfinished beef with him from, I guess, when they met in Germany or something. And he's looking to get revenge on him for whatever he did. Not exactly sure. And then Mercer looked back at the camera and said, "We'll return to world class after tea." And I laughed. I mean, it's genuine raw material, man. I love this shit in pro wrestling. It's obviously not overly scripted or edited. I mean, Christ, there's a part in this interview where there's a jet flying overhead and it almost drowns out Adams entirely while he's trying to cut his promo. But it works. You know, it feels authentic. It's a 2-minute package, essentially, of everything you need to know about who Chris Adams is, where he comes from, and what his goals and objectives are. It's more effective than the AEW method of bringing in new talent, where it's just, "Oh my god, it's Toski Kojima! He wrestled in underground fuck-off wrestling in Nagoya, Japan, in front of 50 people!" And then he immediately jobs in his first TV match, and you never see him again. But I digress. Then we had Gentleman Chris Adams and Paul Vachon one-on-one. God, I'll tell you something else. You know, this stuff is so subtle back in the day, but it really goes to show just how the culture shifted when it comes to the kinds of wrestling fans that are around today. You know, right before they ring the bell for this match, there's a lady outside the ring waving and smiling at Chris in the ring. And of course, Chris catches her out of the corner of his eye and he smiles back at her and waves. And then she just casually goes to take her seat to watch the match. It's like, dude, you don't even see wrestling fans like this in the business anymore. Like the average, down-to-earth, kind human beings that don't know a wrist lock from a wristwatch, but god damn it, they know who the good guys are and who the bad guys are, and they just came to see their hometown heroes win matches. I don't even know how to describe wrestling fans these days, but I hate them. I can tell you that much. The match itself wasn't anything to write home about, but good enough enhancement match. Obviously, Mercer had mentioned that Paul Vachon is the brother of Mad Dog Vachon. I mean, you could probably see the close resemblance without needing the clarification, but it's always good to have it. Adams goes over with the Enziguri. Probably not the best opponent for him to be working with in there if he's trying to get over his flashier offense, like the super kicks and everything, but it sufficed. And I think this was the point in the program this week where current booker Ken Mantell took from the playbook of future 2022 Vince McMahon and said, "All right, enough of putting these good guys over. It's time to get some heat." That took us to Jose Lothario versus Kamala. God, poor Lothario. Standing there signing autographs before the bell, only to end up getting fed to this big 385-pound Ugandan giant. And in this case of the match, literally being fed to Kamala, as he ended up biting off a portion of his forehead at the end there. So the story they're seeming to run with is that Kamala's becoming a little more unhinged and wild. Last week, if you recall, they shot the angle where Kamala destroyed Toriatsu. He attacked Arman Hussein, gave him the big splash, and essentially wrote him out of world class. And this week, the whole story of the match here, well, an angle would probably be the better term to use, but they start with Jose ducking and avoiding all of Kamala's attempted lockups, and then he ends up snapping completely and starts chomping away on Jose's forehead in the corner of the ring, which leads to Manning calling for the DQ. Guess that's in the world-class rulebook where intentionally eating a man on live television is not permitted. And then, while Skandar Akbar and Friday are outside the ring just letting Kamala loose, Chris Adams runs down to pull Jose out of the ring and make the save. But, yeah, this is kind of the new developing story with Kamala on world-class TV. He's becoming a little more unpredictable and dangerous, and while Friday and Akbar are essentially the only ones that have the ability to control him, they're seeming to just let Kamala run wild under his own power. It's a cool little angle, and while the idea of human cannibalism in pro wrestling is hard to suspend disbelief in 2022, I mean, Christ, I've seen a lot stupider in just the last 2 or 3 years. Do I even need to mention the exploding barbed wire death match? And keeping on with the action here, we had Buddy Roberts against the Iceman in the second match of our double main event. And again, I always like to mention this because we're staying consistent with these retro reviews. I appreciate the dynamic of throwing in some of the babyface challengers at the Freebirds so that they're not always going back to the same well with the Von Erichs. You know, last week they had the heat angle where the Iceman got attacked after the penalty box match with the Freebirds. He's obviously had several altercations with them on TV in recent weeks, so now he has the chance to go out there on his own and take the fight to one of the heels. It was a perfectly fine main event. You know, probably not the most exciting match in the world, but I wasn't bored. Yeah, both guys worked hard. They were sweat like motherfuckers by the end there. Definitely stood out by the time they were all chopping back and forth with one another and all the sweat was splashing all over the place. Yeah, they laid on the mat and holds for a good chunk of the match, so I can understand if you're a more modern wrestling fan, you probably fell asleep watching a time or two. But I can at least say that Buddy Roberts grabbing hair and pulling tights on Parsons to actually break the holds got bigger reactions than most of the shit you see in the business today, so hey, it worked. The lame DQ finish was, well, exactly that, lame. In the big afterbirth heat angle, because again, got to get more heat. They had the Freebirds all come down to the ring to jump the Iceman. And during the attack, Michael Hayes pulled out a pair of scissors because they were plotting to cut off the locks of Iceman here. Much like I talked about here a couple weeks back on WCW, where they did an angle similar to this on TV, they have Parsons valiantly struggling back and trying to gain possession of the scissors while the heels are fighting back on him. And all the while, the only thing myself and Bill Mercer are thinking is, are we not concerned here that someone could possibly die getting these scissors jabbed into their jugular at some point? I mean, it's not likely that it would happen, but it's not out of the realm of possibilities. Now that is what we call risky business, daddy. God, the other thing, too, that hit me during this, there were a lot of hair angles going on in the 80s. It's like on the other station, we got Paul Jones' Army and Jimmy Valiant fighting over who's going to shave the other bald. Here in 83 in World Class, we got the Freebirds cutting off dreadlocks of the Iceman in a show-closing angle. And these boys were really about humiliating one another and cutting off everyone's hair. And, of course, the end result here is the Freebirds cutting off a dreadlock. One dreadlock. And then Chris Adams is out once again, about 5 minutes too late to make the save for the second run into the show. I know, you probably have figured Chris would have been better off just standing there by the entryway instead of doing whatever he was doing in the back prior to this mass beatdown. I don't know, maybe he was taking a dump or something, who knows. But this is all well and good, and now they're setting up what I'd presume to be a hair versus hair match with Parsons and one of the Freebirds. I'd imagine it would have been Michael Hayes, since that's kind of like the big money match there, but I don't know, it could also end up being Buddy Roberts, since he was the one that actually cut off the piece of hair. And this was all recap for Mercer when they came back from the break. Pretty much, Mercer described the show as one of the most chaotic editions of world-class TV because we essentially started with average, status quo, well and good professional wrestling, and then everything that happened after the opening 2 matches was all about heat. And, now they got plenty of it this week, I'll tell you that much. Very good episode all around, though. They're starting to rack up the build for the Star Wars show. This show didn't have a single appearance from any of the Von Erichs either, which is kind of surprising. That might have been one of the first world-class episodes we've been recapping where none of the Von Erichs make an appearance. But there was still a lot to like about the show, and even if the heat angles kind of felt excessive on this one, hey, at least this is during a time where the babyfaces were actually going to get their revenge in the end, so at least it was justified. And as we wrap up here, I'm probably going to go have myself some tea and crumpets right now. Thanks for stopping into the show today, and we'll be back on Monday for another classic installment of the 5 Starr Wrestling Report. Make sure to subscribe, like the show, comment, and stay posted each week for new material. Take care, all. Peace out.